You're listening to the Subrogation Support Network, a podcast from Mathieson, Wickert & Layer, America's subrogation law firm, with dissemination of new developments and changes in subrogation law, as well as emerging trends and best practices. Here's your host, Ashton Kirsch.
Hello, everybody. This is Ashton Kirsch, your host with today's episode of the Subrogation Support Network podcast. Today, it is my privilege to have Lee Mendelson joining us today. Lee and I are going to have a really fantastic conversation about two things that I am just fascinated in. One, mediations, and two, negotiations. Lee has a mediation firm. He's going to tell us a bit about what he does as a mediator. Lee also, in similar fashion to myself, loves negotiations. He's actually a professor in negotiation strategy. We'll ask some questions there and talk about some takeaways, some tips, tricks that you as the audience can take away and apply in your day-to-day practice as a lawyer or as a subrogation specialist. Lee, thanks again. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, thank you, first of all, Ashton, for having me on here. This is going to be really fun. And I know both of us are negotiation nerds. We love this stuff, and I love talking about it. Yeah, that's great. But yeah, so I had my own law firm for 22 years. I owned my own firm. I had about 20 employees, lawyers, paralegals, support staff, focused mostly on subrogation. I also did business litigation and some employment work, and I sold my firm a few years ago. And when I sold my firm, I became a full-time mediator. And I started out mediating just completely on my own with the company Mendelson Mediation, and I did that for a short period of time. And then recently, I guess about a year ago, I joined a company called ADR Services, which is a panel in Los Angeles, but I mediate nationwide on Zoom and in person. And that's my full-time gig. I also am a professor, as you mentioned, at Pepperdine University, where I teach negotiation theory and practice. I teach once a week for 4 hours. So it's a 4-hour course once a week, and it's great, and I love it. And I also do negotiation trainings. So people will hire me for a day and I'll go out and train. Sometimes it's a sales force. Sometimes it's insurance adjusters, like frontline adjusters. A lot of times that's what it is, because that's been my world for so long. And I also teach on what's called mediating the litigated case. And at Pepperdine, that's where they do their mediation training course. It's a 5-day course for lawyers and judges that want to become mediators. And I teach the negotiation prong of that. So it's a 1 day out of the 5 days where we focus just on negotiation. And that's what I talk about.
Well, thank you, Professor. That is extremely helpful. You start asking me some stuff in the Socratic method. Let's not do that.
I will try to do that. Nobody wants that anymore. Yeah.
So in your mediation practice, is there a specific type of case that clients, lawyers are coming to you for? Or is it largely subrogation, or does it kind of run the gambit? Is it everything? What's your specialty?
I'll tell you what my breakdown is. As you know about me, a huge part of my practice was subrogation. So I get a good amount of subrogation mediations because that's what my expertise is. I also do a good amount of personal injury mediation because that dovetails right into it with the tort area. And then I also, as a practicing attorney, I did a certain amount of employment work. So I do some employment mediations and just some general business. So it runs the gamut a little bit, but I would say the majority, like around 60%, maybe a little more than that, is tort related. So it might be, products liability, a lot of, subrogation, personal injury in that world. That's about 60 some odd percent of what I do.
Do you get much pushback from defense attorneys since you were a subrogation attorney and now you're mediating subrogation cases? Or is there not much issue on it?
Honestly, not as much as you might think it is. And I'll tell you why. I think that where my expertise in the area overrides that. Because when you hire a mediator, there's really two types of mediators that you can hire. They call them facilitative or evaluative. A facilitative mediator is somebody that's just running numbers back and forth mostly. They're just running you offered this, I'll take it, like I always compare it, the dog with the little thing that he's got under his chin and he's running back and forth. That's more of a facilitator, not to put it down, but that's more of a facilitative mediator. I'm more of an evaluative mediator in a lot of ways, meaning I have expertise in the area. And so I don't have a dog in the fight. And I explain that very clearly to all the parties early on, but they appreciate my knowledge of how this case is going to work and my understanding of the insurance industry. So I think that overrides that.
So now on the scale of passive mediator, that you're sitting there letting the parties just go back and forth, to kind of very aggressive, where if we've all had mediators, just had a mediator a few weeks ago, where, I mean, I loved it because I had a weak case and they got it done. But the mediator legitimately came in and was just talking out of both sides of their mouth and just telling us stuff he shouldn't have told us. And the other side, same thing, but did get it to a really strong resolution. So there's like those two levels. Like, where do you fit in? Are you out there? Obviously, they trust you with your expertise. But are you obviously not doing anything unethical like on that one side?
No,
but how about are you out there though? I'm not asking if you're doing that. Yeah. But I'm saying, like, are you going in and giving your opinions and strong opinions and really guiding the parties to say where you see things going?
I don't ever tell people what to do. The power is in your arms as a party to make a decision. However, I will make suggestions and I will give my expertise. Like, I had one just the other day, okay? It was a subrogation case. It was a fire case. And it was I thought the liability was pretty clear cut, but I wasn't going to say that, okay? Fire at the neighbor's house, the insured's house caught on fire, and it was $650,000 in damages, okay? The subrogation carrier, the plaintiff, was very adamant that they're holding on to making that $650,000 demand. And they were like, this is clear liability. They need to make a payment to me. The defense was like, you know what? These guys have not proved this up. They had an expert report, but to be honest with you, it was like one of those cursory expert reports early on, and they hadn't been on the ground and really done enough work on it. There'd been no depositions. There'd been none of that legwork. So the defense was, hey, we're offering $25,000. So we had a pretty good $650 to $25,000. But what I was able to do with my knowledge of the insurance industry is to get behind why these parties were so separated. And I did that by asking questions. Okay, this mediation took place when? It took place about a week and a half ago. So we're talking December, right? This is a mid-level insurance carrier, not one of the big boys, but not small either, right? Like a nice sized carrier. But what do they need? They wanted to get, I started asking questions about it, and I discovered, hey, they want some money in before the end of the year and to move, they're trying to close out some cases before the end of the year. Because it was an early mediation, right? And then I got to the defense side and I found out they have two policies. There was a homeowner's policy for $500,000 and there was a $1 million umbrella policy. So what did the defense want to do? They wanted to stay within the initial policy. They wanted to stay within the $500,000. So I was able to figure that out through knowledge of the industry more than, hey, liability versus, liability and adding up the damages and everything else. I just knew. And I also found out that the plaintiff, the subrogation carrier, still was with their in-house. It was still in-house. Okay. They hadn't farmed it out. And I asked them, hey, if you do go into like real litigation, you dive into this case, what are you going to do? They're going to hire, a third party, like a Mediation or whoever they're going to hire to litigate the case, right? So how much is that? And so I said to them, do these attorneys, are you paying them hourly or are you to pay them a commission? Pay them a commission. So that's 25%. So you can knock that 25% off of that $650,000. So by knocking that 25% off of that $650,000, you're within the defendant's $500,000 policy. So that's kind of the way I look for interest behind positions. And I try to help people get to those interest behind the positions. And we were able to get it settled for $485 or something.
That's extremely helpful. When you have the ability to know enough about the industry, know enough about the space, be able to package all that baggage and try to come to terms, because oftentimes parties, you just see it all the time, painted into two different corners. But little do you know that there is, the circle diagram in front of you, there's a lot of common space. There's a lot of room to get it done, but nobody wants to kind of take that step and make the ask. Nobody wants to get done. So you can fit in there and work to work it. I
Yeah,
love that.
when I teach this stuff, right, we talk about distributive bargaining versus integrative bargaining. Okay. Distributive bargaining, simply put, is a pie. Okay. There's one pie that you need to cut up into pieces, right? Integrative bargaining is where you look outside of the pie. You look outside of the pie to find other solutions, or what are these people's real interests? They're making positions and making demands based, and I tell folks that I mediate with, parties all of the time, I try to figure out what is the interest behind the position. Okay. And a lot of times, listen, in a subrogation case, a lot of it's, hey, my interest is getting that money in my pocket, and the defense's interest is not writing a check, right? I mean, that's pretty clear, or writing a check for the smallest amount that they're going to have to write it for. I respect both of those positions, but there may be more to it. And we try to figure that out.
And you're a people person, obviously a great communicator. One of the other things that's always so tough in mediations is kind of the human dynamic. And you think with insurance companies that there wouldn't be that much at play, but there is, right? People get stuck in positions because of ego, because of a number of other things. I just had one maybe 2-3 months ago where we had an insured who had a decent deductible, had a small self-retained position, and the client was totally adamant that we're not doing anything that the insured doesn't agree with, even though they frankly had the right to do whatever they wanted to do. So they had to, in that case, we scheduled an early mediation because we realized this insured was stuck on, it was a good case, stuck on 100% and attorney's fees. There was no there's no right to attorney's fees. They didn't get it. So we had to set the mediation. The mediator, we queued them up beforehand. We said, like, hey, we have a great insured, good person, very bright, but they're just not understanding the law from our end. Like, we need somebody to come in and help, not just mediate with the other side, but to kind of explain, be a unbiased set of eyes. And I think that's kind of like one of those things that relatively go unnoticed, but I utilize all the time, is using your services early as an ability to even build get expectations in order.
Well, and that's one of the great reasons for a pre-mediation call. Before the mediation, a lot of times it depends on the size or the situation, but a whole lot of the time I call the attorney up before I say, hey, listen, let's set up a pre-mediation call beforehand. And I ask you, okay, Ashton, what do you need from me? Okay, I see where we're at. I understand the case, and I've read the brief. I understand your position. I understand their position. But what do you need from me? And in that kind of a thing, you're like, listen, I need you to help me work with this insured, and I'll focus on that. Listen, it's in the employment world, it's a lot more than it is in the insurance world, but I do this quite a bit. If there's a big SIR, okay, and somebody doesn't want to write a check, and there's a business that doesn't want to write a check, I will spend a lot of time just talking to them and empathizing with them and understanding where they're coming from, and they appreciate it. People need, like that insured in your case, needs some sort of validation that, hey, this guy totally screwed me, or whatever happened, right? And I'm like, this defendant burned my place down because they were not following the protocols that they should have been following, and it ruined my business for a period. They need me to understand, hey, I was a small business owner for a long period of time. I understand how that feels. It's awful. I get it. But today, that's already happened. That's not something we can control today. That's already happened. What can we control today? How we resolve this case. And let's figure out what's going to be best for you and what's best. And I know you don't want to hear this, but also what's going to be best for the other side, because they need to get rid of it too. So let's find a good, or not. Hey, maybe not. Maybe the defendant's going to be totally not come to the table. And if that's the case, hey, I'm not going to tell you to settle something that's not something you ought to settle. But I'm going to encourage you if it makes sense.
Absolutely. Now, timing of mediation, I think, is key. And the example you gave me was a case prior to counsel being retained. So I'd imagine it was a pre-suit mediation. I've been pushing a lot more of my clients to consider early pre-suit mediations, early litigation mediations. The example you gave and you've been talking about was, it sounds like, it was before counsel was retained. I'd imagine it was pre-suit. But what are your thoughts on when to mediate and how to figure that out? On my end, if it's a jurisdiction where mediation is going to be required, we don't think that much is going to come forward in discovery that's going to make or break the case. A lot of auto collision cases, situations like that, or even like cases where liability is extremely complex, the other side's admitted some fault and it's going to cost us both a lot of money for experts. There's going to be some of those scenarios where it just simply makes sense to give it a shot, spend a couple $1,000s to see what we can come up with before big costs come into play through suit. What are your thoughts on timing?
I think pre-suit mediation like that is a good or early suit mediation after you've got the suit filed and you're good to go. But that's what this case actually, they had just filed suit, but they didn't. It was a little weird, but they had just filed suit, but they didn't farm it out to somebody yet. I think that's a good idea in a lot of cases if you're willing, and you should be willing, to come to the table and put your cards out there, because you're going to have to put your cards out there anyway when discovery happens. So get everything out there that you can, or as much as you feel comfortable with getting out on the table. And hopefully the defense will do that as well. And when you do that, you can resolve a case. I go back and forth with people a lot. When you do, let me ask you a question, Ashton. When you submit a brief to mediation, do you usually do a confidential brief, or do you usually send a copy to the other party?
Totally case by case. I will oftentimes do both. Usually I'll send I'll just write my mediation submission, my mediation statement. I'll send it to everybody, right? So that we can get everything out there, get as many cards on the table as possible. But I may very well call you to give you information confidentially, or give you a confidential brief that outlines kind of some of the difficult facts, some of the underlying stuff that, may to get out in discovery, may not, right? Certain things that I just don't want to put on the table, especially certain things. I like to go into mediation where, there's a part of me that has a hard time fully trusting a lot of mediators. Mediators I've worked with quite a bit. I have a few mediators where I'll go to them and I'll be like, hey, here's the deal with client authority. I'm going to tell you exactly what I want. I'm going to give you my bottom line, and we're not going to play the game. A lot of other mediators, I'm not going to do that until later on. So depends on who it is, depends on the case, on how I do it. But a lot of times it'll be both. I like to get something in front of everybody, outlining the best arguments forward. But then again, there's a lot of kind of the negatives.
There's a lot of things you don't need to tell the other side. Right. I mean, I like that. I like giving information. I like the parties exchanging information prior to, but at the same time, like I said, I do those pre-mediation calls, or I do, or sometimes people submit like a supplemental confidential brief to me that says, hey, this is the settlement situation. This is where we're at in settlement. This is where I want to be in settlement around this target range. And that's great too. And it is so important to keep things confident. This is my little speech when I first sit down with people, is everything you tell me, I am not going to tell the other side unless I get your permission from you to tell the other side. Now, having said that, there's a lot of stuff that you're going to want me to tell the other side, or else we may not get this case settled. So you're going to want to exchange as much information as you can. But at the same time, I'm not saying anything unless you tell me it's okay. And I think to have that level of comfort with your mediator is really important.
Absolutely. Now, the next big thing in mediations I want to touch on with you is in-person or virtual. Obviously, the world has changed post-COVID. And I think if you asked me like the year after the COVID pandemic, whatever you call it, I would have said that it is a negative, that the virtual mediations aren't resulting in the same commitment by the parties. It means a lot, plus sometimes it's a good experience to get out there in front of your client, get there for everyone. I wasn't a big fan, but I'd say over the last few years, my perspective has totally shifted. I think that the virtual nature of mediations in many scenarios, especially for subrogation, leaves a lot more room for mediations to occur. It makes more room for mediators to follow up and stay more involved, because mediation isn't always just on the day of. So I'd love your thoughts on where do you think things are going? Where have they been? And what's the pros and cons?
It depends on the case, just like everything else. I will tell you, over 80% of my mediations, maybe even more, are on Zoom. Most of the mediations are on Zoom. The big pro, I feel like, and it depends on the size of the case, it depends on the type of damages, it depends on the number of parties, all that kind of stuff, right? The big pro for Zoom mediation is decision makers are much more likely to be present on a Zoom mediation than they are in an in-person mediation. That decision maker, that supervisor at the insurance carrier, is much more likely to sit on a Zoom because they know, hey, I'm going to be in the other room talking to those guys for an hour and a half sometimes, right? To the defense. So you can go about your business if you're on Zoom. you go about, do your work, do whatever you need to do, take phone calls. And it's not like you have to sit in that room with somebody while you do it. You're in your own office, you're in your own house, and you're good to go. And people really like that. And, back in the day when I would do mediations for this one carrier, and they always sent the same guy on every single case. It was his job to be the guy to show up, and so that's great. And I like that guy a lot. And he was a cool guy, but he didn't know much about these cases. He had a little bit of authority, but he had to try to figure out what to do. It was a lot more difficult. Now, having said that, on some cases, it's great to be in person. The one thing you lose from the Zoom, from being in person, is that, hey, let's walk down the hall and grab a coffee, right? Kind of a thing, and touching somebody on the shoulder and that kind of a thing, you lose out. But I will tell you, I think Zoom is a lot. It's in subrogation cases, most of the time, it's a better option. And it's also a better option because honestly, there's a certain amount a lot of mediators understand torts, but there's only a certain amount of mediators that understand subrogation. And so you've got to be able to find a mediator that understands subrogation. I think that weighs a lot. It's a lot stronger than having somebody in person. It's more important.
But man, I missed the stale coffee and donuts. That was the best. That guy must have been a connoisseur if he was the mediator, the designated mediation official for the insurance carrier.
Let me tell you, ADR, where I do the company that I do mediations for, the panel that I'm on, we have offices. We have a lot of offices around, right? And we have an office in Century City, and we have an office in downtown LA. And every day in both of those offices at 3:00, they bring you a hot chocolate chip cookie. That fantastic. Chocolate chip cookie is fantastic, right? I mean, that's like that. So that is lost.
Well, there is a physiological impact of the heat from the chocolate impacts the insular cortex of the brain, making you friendlier. The glucose release also would make you more reasonable. Back to the physiology of negotiations, but
I don't know, but I do know that people like
it's delicious.
And that I like it. And, you order in lunch and it's all not, that is a nice thing. But I think that people, I think it's a lot, pros and cons.
But I really like the point that you make that now mediation and the selection of a mediator doesn't just have to be geographical. I deal with a lot of cases. I'm suing several autonomous vehicle manufacturers involving some really complex technology and issues, where frankly, the average mediator in outstate Wisconsin isn't going to know much about it. They've never seen a self-driving vehicle. There's no Tesla even in their small town. So it's very difficult. So this is giving us the ability to actually select kind of somebody who knows the underlying subject matter. I think that's great.
Right. In those cases, whatever. I don't want to go off on a tangent. Those as more as we get in, this better than me probably. The auto cases are going the way of products liability now. Somebody has to understand that in those types of cases. But anyway,
well, I'd refer you back to a podcast episode just a few sessions ago where we talked just about that, autonomous vehicle claims. So onto the subject, still on mediations. One thing I've been doing recently in my mediations is, because it's not in person, and I still wanted to create some sort of connection and human element between the parties, I'm requesting joint sessions. You don't see it that often, but it's something that I push for as often as possible with mediations. What are your thoughts on joint sessions prior to the mediation commencing? Do you think it's a waste of time, or do you think it does make sense in some scenarios?
I don't do a ton of joint sessions. I like everybody. I do a quick joint session. In the very beginning, I like everybody to say hi to each other and see who's there. And hey, because I want them to know that they're human beings. I want everybody to know that there's a human being over there, right? And I do that. And it's good, like with insurance professionals, it's good for them to see each other and talk to each other. I think that's okay. In other cases where people are more emotional and angry, they don't need it. They don't need joint sessions. I do employment cases sometimes. This is not in the subrogation world, this is employment, but somebody wrongful termination case, that person's pretty angry at the person that fired him. And the person that fired him is pretty angry at this for getting sued. And so it's not helpful. But in these types of cases, in just where everybody's an insurance professional, it's good to say, hey, hi, nice to see you, and to know who you're working with, basically.
Absolutely. And I mean, the one thing that kind of gets my attention is my first mediation, right? And this is talking about why maybe joint sessions don't work in those ones that are more emotionally attached. I fly down to Georgia 3 months into my practice of law to mediate on a occupational accident reimbursement case in Georgia, which is one of the worst states for subrogation. So go down there. We have an employee who just thinks us as the OCAC carriers trying to just steal his money. He, after the joint session, screaming and yelling, leaves. We go to our different rooms. Mediator comes back and says, "Oh, well, just so you know, we've called 911 and locked the doors because
Oh my
claimant
God.
is going to his car to get a gun." And we're like, "Whoa, okay." And that got me thinking on, maybe that's not the right
Maybe Zoom is
call.
good.
Maybe we should avoid being in
That's
person with this
insane,
guy.
though. That's
Yeah,
crazy.
the case got settled, but that was good. All
Oh,
right,
God.
yeah. So to leave it more open-ended for you, but then I want to go to negotiations. What tips and tricks and advice do you have for attorneys as they go into a mediation? What should they be thinking about? What can they do to maximize their likelihood of a positive success?
I mean, the most important thing is to be prepared to do full on preparation prior to the mediation. And by that, I know people are generally prepared in their own end. People know their own case in their own arguments. But what I recommend to folks is to look at it from the other side and know the other side's arguments. What is the other side going to do? When are they going to walk away? Because where are you going to find a settlement in these mediations? It's between your walkaway point and their walkaway point. And you want to figure out what their walkaway point is so you can get as close to it as possible, but also get the settlement.
Yeah. So I think that that's fantastic. Now, the next thing I want to briefly talk about is negotiations. I think your background as a negotiations professor is fantastic, right? Especially given the fact that your role as a mediator is dealing with all these different parties negotiating. So obviously, your background is, you're mediating. That's a part of negotiating with two sides. You're seeing all the other lawyers negotiate. What is your number one tip for negotiating in general?
As a mediator, and it's back to being prepared, it's really the same thing. But as a mediator, I view myself as a negotiation coach in a lot of ways. A lot of, like, in my class, I always have somebody early on in the semester raise their hand and say, "Oh, isn't it great to have a bad negotiator on the other side of your case?" And I'm like, "No, absolutely not. You want a good negotiator on the other side of your case. You want somebody that's going to be able to look to what their true interests are and not try to stand on these positions and not move. You want somebody to be able to step into your shoes just as you need to be able to step into the other side's shoes and see where they are." That type of a dovetail for the interest is crucial. So that's what I recommend on that.
Absolutely. And I think that one of the obviously negotiations in general, I think my number one tip I always have, and I have a presentation about 25 top tips, but I think my number one is always catching flies with honey. And that's not so the same in negotiating mediations because it is just inherently transactional because you're not talking necessarily back and forth with the other side. But usually just, in negotiations far too often, right? If we're training somebody how to negotiate outside of the mediation context, what I'll do is I'll actually pretty often for clients, I'll come in and I'll shadow or ghost their adjusters where they know about it. But I'm listening into the calls. I'm listening to them negotiate. And then I'm giving some training afterwards on what I saw and what I heard. And I think one of the most difficult things is you hear these adjusters and very experienced, bright people know this stuff like the back of their hand, but they approach the other side with, "Here's my facts. Let me tell you how great my facts." And the other side's like, "Well, let me tell you my facts." And then the two fists go bouncing together, two bulls
That's
running into each other, no resolution, right? So,
So that's
I
the,
mean,
yeah, that's the old adage from negotiations. It's be soft on the people, hard on the problem. You want to be soft on the other side in the way of being a friendly, nice, kind person. Crack a joke, get to know them, ask them about their family, know if they have a dog. I mean, these things, these things are make people relax a little bit and be willing to come to the table and understand. Be authentic, be an authentic human being, makes a big difference when you're negotiating with a person one-on-one, and even in a mediation, for me to be able, I mean, I always go in and I try to talk to the parties as a person before we really get into the nitty gritty. And sometimes if it's seasoned adjusters, they're ready to get into the nitty gritty, right? But they still like a joke. They want to crack a joke. They want to have a good time. Nobody wants it. It's hard enough. This job can be hard enough without being super serious about yourself. Now, having said that, you don't want to be serious about yourself, but you do want to be serious about the issue, right? You want to focus on what are your facts and what are the issues, but at the same time, be able to be a human being. And I think if you are able to do that, especially like you said, and when I do trainings for adjusters, I emphasize the same thing. And I think that's really cool that that they let you do that, where you sit in and listen in and you're able to give like a few pointers afterwards. I think that's probably a good experience for you as an attorney as well.
Oh, it's been incredibly impactful, because you see so many things. People that, claims managers, supervisors, people I've looked up to, and I've been working with them as clients since I was, a first-year attorney. And then I come in assuming that, wow, they've got to be amazing at this. And guess what? They're amazing on the facts. They're amazing at the management. Then you hear them on the phone talking to somebody, and you're realizing why they're not getting a resolution. Frankly, why so many cases are coming to me and not resolving by the carrier. And it's largely that. It's largely that I think that a lot of the courses that people take now, right? A lot of the mindset is very transactional in the claim space. And that's where I like to train my people to say, hey, step back, right? Ask some questions. I say, even if it's talking about the weather, I actually have notes that I take on all adverse adjusters, and I refer back to them, right? I have a personal Rolodex, and I'll say, oh, Marjorie with ABC TPA. Marjorie just told me her daughter played in a club volleyball tournament down in Florida. And I'll be like, oh, hey, Marjorie, how'd that tournament go in December? And now it's April. She's like, oh my God, how did he remember that? I'm like, well, because I took a 2-second note. But it just opens up a whole new system.
People appreciate that.
Wild.
People really like that. And it's just part of being a person. And I think that once you cut through that and you get to it, people aren't going to be as difficult to deal with. So it's strategic and it works well and it's important. And it will also it also gives me, I have a better time too. It gives me a better, I enjoy the mediation more too, or the negotiation more, when I'm able to talk to people like that. And there are some negotiations that I've had where I've talked for a long period of time about things that don't matter, or things that do matter to them as people, but don't matter to the case. And then not as much time talking about the case. That happens sometimes too. It really is. You have to get used to it and you have to get a feel for it. But I do think that it's very important. Empathy is a big word that I use. I like to be empathetic to other people, and I think it's good for them to understand that I'm an empathetic person. Let me ask you a question. Your negotiation book, are you writing that for the handbooks that you guys use over there? Are you doing something a little different?
Yes, it's through the firm. So it kind of morphed. Initially, the book that I was working on was just a handbook on negotiations, kind of my 2-hour seminar on steroids, a little bit more example scenarios, cases, about 50 different tricks with kind of case studies surrounding it. From there, I've built on that a bit further, where I've actually now interviewed, and I'm working on interviewing some of the founding partners of some of the big Subro firms, interviewing a lot of different experts, engineers, different folks, claims managers, mediators, and including some testimonials. So it's expanded from being a small little handbook to something more. But yeah, it's going to be along with, our firm publishes all the Subro treatises in every law library.
Those books are great. Yeah. I'll tell you, the reason why I asked that is because, and I think I mentioned to you this once before, but when 20 some odd years ago, I was doing all auto subrogation, right? And then somebody approached me about doing some work comp stuff. Okay. And I was like, I'll try to do some, and I went out and bought the book that you guys publish on work comp subrogation. And I used that book for years. I still have it. I went back and I would look things up and, oh, that makes sense. And yeah, I used that for years. It was great. So anyway, those books are terrific.
I can say, I feel like I am an expert in work comp subrogation. But even with, having done this for a while, even with Gary Wickert, my partner, has been doing this for 35, 40 years. We're still always looking back at our resources and pulling out the books like, you know what? all right, loss of consortium allocation in Nebraska. How's this going to apply? So yeah, definitely my pages are very worn with a lot of earmarks on them. Oh, it's good stuff.
Well, I think that's exciting. And I tell you what, man, there is no better subject than negotiation because it all is about negotiation. And one of the things that I teach in my course, in the very beginning of the course, I go through and ask everybody for, hey, what are ways to resolve disputes? What is dispute resolution? And really the main things that come up are litigation, negotiation, and mediation, right? And arbitration. But surrounding all of those is really negotiation. Even when you're in litigation, you are negotiating. It's a part, these are tools you're using. You know, a deposition may be a tool to get more facts to be more helpful in your negotiation. But most cases there are cases that go to trial. I mean, you know this. There's plenty of cases that go to trial, but most cases don't. Most cases settle. So you're in a negotiation all the time. And to have those tools is crucial.
It's the most impactful skill set that any adjuster, any lawyer can really learn to utilize. And I'll be honest with you, law schools, it's amazing that you're there. And I would ask you, please just start pushing your school and any other schools, anyone on the podcast who has connections with law schools, please just ask them to give more attention to negotiations. Because I can't tell you all of the obscure, frankly, worthless things we learn in law school, but then you have one course on negotiations. And it's just kind of wild to me that no matter what it is, litigation, of course, we need to negotiate, most important skill, but even transactional work, family law, bankruptcy, and it's given far too little attention. And if you're a lawyer and you're only relying on your, 1-3 credit semester doing negotiations, take the chance to learn more because this is the most important thing you can take away for your career, I feel.
Well, I'll brag on Pepperdine where I teach. Pepperdine is ranked by U.S. News and World Report nearly every year is the number one dispute resolution law school, the number one program in dispute resolution. It's a great program. They teach different negotiation courses. They teach mediation. They teach arbitration. It's terrific. And I was lucky enough. I went to law school in Chicago. I went to Northwestern a couple of years back. and I actually took a negotiations course back in those days. Back in the 90s, there weren't a lot of schools that were teaching negotiation. So it really helped. At my law practice, my entire law practice was greatly helped by the fact that I understood negotiation. And then at the end of the day, I was able to sell my law practice using those skills as well. So that was fortunate.
Fantastic. Now, obviously, as a professor and as a mediator, you probably have a lot of tips, tricks, recommendations. We outlined a few of them. Any other, big tips, that you can have the audience walk away with that you like to teach in your class? Like the big takeaways from the semester, the students remember this. What would that be?
Oh, I mean, the last thing, and I said this before, but the last thing that I say and the first thing that I say is the number one rule is be prepared. And here's the lesson that I learned. Honestly, as an early attorney, as a young attorney, and I'm working smaller balance auto cases, so auto subrogation cases, right? And I was like, oh, I can shuck and jive. I can talk. I don't need to look at the case beforehand. I would look at it right before and I'd go in there and try to sell a case, right? I had all the confidence and cockiness in the world. And I got settlements. I mean, I did a good job. But when I started to really start to learn about negotiation and to study negotiation and to read books on negotiation, I learned, hey, I don't know what my best alternative to a negotiated agreement is. I don't know what my BATNA is. I don't know what my walkaway point actually is. I need to decide that before I go into the negotiation, right? Because you get involved in a negotiation or in a mediation, and sometimes your whole goal is just to get a settlement. Sometimes it's not the right thing to get a settlement today if the other side's not making the right offer. You need to know what you're going to do next. And at the same time, as I said a little bit earlier, you got to do the same thing with the other side. You want to figure out what they're going to do if we don't settle today, what their walkaway point is going to be. And that's going to change. Your estimation may be wrong, and that's going to change, but it's important to know that. And then you can decide where basically the zone of agreement is. It's between the two walkaway points. But it also is going to help you decide, hey, am I going to make In a subrogation case, it may be a little different because there's an amount that you're going to demand off the bat usually. But am I going to be the one that's going to make the first demand? How am I going to anchor this? Or do I want to let them anchor it? Because I don't know enough about. I want to be the anchor. I want to set the number, but not if I don't know enough about their case, because I may artificially set the wrong anchor too low. If I'm the plaintiff's attorney, I may set the anchor too low because I don't know enough about the other side's case. So it's to study the case, try to understand it as much as you can, and to go in there open-minded. When you go into the negotiation, understand it, but also be willing to take in new information and change your estimates as you go.
I'd love to have us just set one of our 1-hour seminars like side to side, because we talk about so many things that are just, it's fantastic. I'm one of these days we're doing a presentation.
100%. I think it'd be great. Yeah, I'd love it.
Yeah, because you mentioned something interesting. You mentioned BATNA, best alternative to a negotiated agreement. That's something where when I train, I kind of explain it. And it's really hard to conceptualize. And one of the big takeaways from that in the subro space is subrogation claims are not just subrogation claims. You'll hear some defense attorneys and some that don't know subro. They're like, oh, subrogation, that's 60%. That's just what happens. You settle a rear end collision for 60%. And it's like, heck no. Like there's no common basis. Every case is different. And that's where it's like, by considering BATNA early, by figuring out like what's our alternative to negotiated agreement. The example I give is, if I have a water supply line failure that's $2,800, guess what? My BATNA is closing the case, right? Or settling for whatever I can get now. Where I never say make a unilateral reduction, but on that case, I very well might, because the choice is closure. But you can't approach it the same way as a case where we have a rear end collision commercial motor vehicle with $500,000 in damages. On that case, what's my alternative? I'm trying the damn case. So thinking about it that way, and with negotiations,
and not only are you trying the case, you're spending the money on the investigator. You're hiring the expert. You're going to spend time in the deposition. And if you're the carrier, hey, I'm going to be paying the attorney. These are all things that are part of your BATNA. When you sit down and try to evaluate the case properly.
And maybe it's because I'm from Wisconsin and we support the beverage industry, but I like to correlate these things to wine in a way, right? Wine or beer somehow. But, one thing is that whenever we talk about investigation, I'd always trade in saying subrogation is not like wine. It doesn't age better with time. You need to investigate early. You need to investigate often. But then I kind of correlated that to the BATNA analysis. And it's saying that, I didn't know this, but I have a buddy of mine who's a collector of fine wine. And I always thought that, good red wines, the longer they store, the better they are. So I thought, not knowing anything. Then he explains this to me. He said, no, depending on the type, the region that the Cabernet, grapes were grown, the way that this was bottled and everything comes into play to say, this is a wine that's going to be best after 25 years. Or, it's a champagne that can sit for 200 years. Or it's a white wine that, you need to drink within 3 years. And thinking about it that way, more like subrogation cases are like wine in that way, in that, every case can be different as to when the maximum potential negotiations point is. When are you at the apex of getting the best deal possible? And that's where, when we consider BATNA, when we consider where is our case at on the specific case level, we're able to maximize our recovery by negotiating and maximizing it at that point in time.
Correct. And you're also, and your BATNA might be right here. Your best alternative might be right here, but that doesn't mean that your reservation value, your walkaway point is not going to be your BATNA. Your walkaway point is going to be a little bit over here, because if your walkaway point was your BATNA, you wouldn't be wasting your time with the mediation today. You know what I mean? You would just go with your BATNA, but it's not. So you got to really try to think these things through. And I also, one of my other tips, another thing that I focus a lot on, is look at objective criteria. Really study the criteria and be objective as you can about it. That's not to say that's what you lead with necessarily, but you want to understand objective criteria going into it. What's your case really worth? And knowing your value is really important.
So when I first got into when I first got into negotiations, it actually started where, and most of my audience knows kind of my backstory, that I commute so far to work. It's like an hour 20 each way, that I'd listen to books on tape. And for about 2 years, I'm like, I'm going to listen to every single book that exists on negotiations. And I did. It was like 190 books that I could find in the Audible library. And then I went on to I'm going to listen to every book that exists on psychology as it relates to communications, negotiations. And that's kind of what got my passion going.
Right.
And just given your background, what is your favorite negotiations book? For the audience, do you have a series? What author kind of really gets you going on that stuff?
It's a tough call. I mean, honestly, okay, just so you and I know, we're very close to the same human being. Just so you know this, I do every morning. I get up and most of my mediations are on Zoom, okay? And they start at 10 o'clock in the morning usually. I get up and I go to Fryman Canyon, which is right here in Studio City where I live. I go to Fryman Canyon. It takes me about an hour to do the hike. And I listen to books on tape while I do that. And I listen to negotiation books. I listen to philosophy and I listen to psychology. Those are the things I focus on because I love this stuff. And that's what I do. I'll tell you what there's a book called Negotiation Genius, which I really like a lot. It's by a guy named, I think his name's Max Braverton. He's one of the guys at the Harvard program on negotiation. I really like that book. Obviously, Getting to Yes is the old classic by William Ury. That's a great book. I like I can't remember the name of the book. The Chris Voss book is a good book. What is it called? Don't Cut. I can't remember what it's called, but it's a good book. It talks, and I like that because it talks a little more about empathy. I also like, I don't know, have you ever read Influence by Robert Cialdi? That's a really good, it's not straight up it is about negotiation. It's not about negotiation in the way we think about it. A lot of it's about the psychology of it. And I really like that book a lot. So I'm listing I like Difficult Conversations. Have you ever read that?
Yep.
That's a really good book. And you know what else I like that I don't know if you've seen this. It's called, her name is Erin, I think May or Murphy, maybe. It's Culture. Oh God, I can't remember the name. I can't remember the name of it. I think it's Erin Murphy. Maybe not. Anyway, it's about culture and identifying different people's culture and how different people negotiate based on what their culture is. And it's called The Culture Map. The name of the book is called The Culture Map. And you can find yourself on the culture map so you can know what type of negotiator you are and how you work with other people. And by knowing who you are helps you change or helps you focus in on your strong points. So anyway, that's a whole bunch of books here, but those are the ones that I really like.
See some great takeaways for the audience. No, the last one, I have not read that one, so I'm going to check that out. But the book of Chris Voss, who's Never Split the Difference, is the one, and that's a good one.
Right.
But I'd say I'd encourage, have you read anything by Nick Linda?
No.
I'd encourage you. That's probably the most impactful ones that I've read because it talks truly the fascinating psychological aspects where just kind of crazy studies that go into play, a lot on anchoring adjustment, a lot on kind of the physiological aspects of it. So, I mean, I would encourage you to read that. But for the audience, you guys got until the next one. You guys have some good reading to do. And then, we'll do our joint mediation negotiation session again, I'm sure, for the audience here.
Negotiation book club, right?
Hey, we could lead that.
That'd be fun, right?
We'll invite everybody, all the tens of audience members, and we'll
Right.
we'll have you and I. It's no,
that'll be fun.
There are a lot of us here, a lot of people listening and hearing all about the subrogation goodness that we have going on.
Great, I love it.
Well, yeah. I mean, I appreciate it. Lee, is there anything else you wanted to add before we wrap this thing up?
No, I got to tell you, I just really appreciate it. I've enjoyed hanging with you and talking about this stuff. I love this stuff. I can talk about it all day and I love what you're doing. And yeah, this is great. So thank you so much.
Beautiful. Well, Lee, I appreciate it. Audience, I encourage you to read some of these books, keep studying negotiations. If you're with the carrier, push early mediations as often as possible. Get with Lee. I'm sure he'd be happy to help. Again, I appreciate you, Lee. I appreciate the audience. Thank you, everyone. This is Ashton Kirsch signing off from this episode of the Subrogation Support Network podcast. Until next time.